And that Board of Peace, if people don't know about, the charter of this Board of Peace, it's not an international body. It's not a UN body. It is a body in which all powers are in the hands of a single person, Donald Trump, not even as president of the US, but as an individual in perpetuity, giving him full colonial authority over everything that happens in Gaza and over all the billions of dollars that they plan to raise for that to go into the hands of Donald Trump and Jared Kushner, who also has a role here, and Tony Blair, infamous war criminal that he is. And it is just on its face, it's outrageous. It wasn't even written in the kind of language that would make sense in terms of international law or international diplomacy. It was one of these bizarre rants that was created by Donald Trump and his little.
Excuse me. It is the smartest, most articulate, important piece of information you've ever seen. I know what I'm talking about because we are making America great again.
Worse than that. Brilliant job of Donald Trumping. I feel sick. I mean,
that's how you know it's a good impression, because I actually can channel him. Like, I know how to, the mannerisms, the thought process. No, it's the greatest speech you've ever heard. That's because I'm the one in charge.
So can it be repealed? Like, what is the I mean, because is this Board of Peace? This can't be real. Right? It's a private club. The money goes to him. Like, how is this real? I mean,
it cannot be real. So, I mean, a couple of things to say about that. That's what's so scary about it. They got, what should have happened is that the UN Security Council should have said, thank you, Mr. President, but, it's not the way things work, But what they did, instead, 15 members of the Security Council, Russia and China abstained, but they could have and should have vetoed it. And they chose not to because they were under pressure from the Arab governments in the region, including the Palestinian Authority under Mahmoud Abbas, to support this resolution. And I can talk to you about what all of the motivations were and so on, but it's outrageous. And what I have written about this is that resolution adopted by the Security Council, without sounding too legalistic, is ultra vires and unlawful.
Yeah.
Because the Security Council does not have any authority that don't come to it from the UN Charter. The UN Charter is a treaty under international law. It is a part of international law. It is not above international law. And the Security Council has no authority to take any action or adopt any resolutions that are inconsistent with international law, the other terms of the Charter, and in particular, is going to sound legalistic, in particular, rules of international law that are jus cogens and erga omnes, basically the highest rules of international law that impose obligations on all countries and international institutions. And the Security Council doesn't have a right to overcome that. And what you need to see is that in 2024, the International Court of Justice adopted a landmark decision in an advisory opinion in which it determined that the occupation of Palestine is entirely unlawful, must end quickly and entirely, that the Palestinians must be compensated, granted a right to return, that Israel was operating segregation and apartheid, racial segregation and apartheid, that all states had a duty not to in any way participate in, support, or cooperate with the occupation or the other crimes being perpetrated by the Israeli regime. And that threw a kind of a fear into Israel's allies in Washington and London and Berlin. And they quickly mobilized to try first to put through another resolution that was almost as bad as the Board of Peace, and then ultimately the Board of Peace, even though it is unlawful. Can it be repealed? It could be repealed, but it would have to be repealed in the Security Council, and the US will veto its repeal, right? Because it has a veto power. So what can happen? And I've written about this as well. There is a mechanism in the UN General Assembly, which has been used historically to get around Security Council shenanigans, where it doesn't act in the ways it's supposed to act when it is required to act, and have 2/3 of the member states of the UN with no veto in the General Assembly acting under what's called Uniting for Peace mechanism, where they could adopt a resolution that could, for example, ask for the International Court of Justice to rule in an advisory opinion on the portions of 2803 that are not lawful and what member states should do about those things that are not lawful. They could call for sanctions and a military embargo against the Israeli regime. They could mandate a protection force. In 1956, at the height of the Suez Crisis, this is how the UN got around the Security Council to mandate the UN emergency force that deployed to the Sinai at the height of the Suez crisis against the wishes of the Israelis and the Americans. So, a lot of these things could happen. The International Court of Justice could play a role in this. The General Assembly with a 2/3 majority could play a role in this in overcoming that. Individual states and groups of states could come together and issue a declaration saying they will in no way collaborate with this exercise and state their very clear position that they oppose it. And then by whittling away at both the legal and political authority of that resolution, we could begin to dismantle it. Now, one thing I'll say, Jen, the Board of Peace will dismantle itself. The way that it's put together.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's full of landmines. And even now, you see, they can't mobilize anyone to actually send troops to be in their occupation, their extension occupation force that they're calling a stabilization force. Nobody wants to give $1 billion to Donald Trump and Jared Kushner to put into their own pockets, right? So it's beginning already to come apart. And now the aggression of the U.S. and Israel against Iran, I think, is going to expedite the crumbling of the so-called Board of Peace. But it can do a lot of damage in the meantime if the world doesn't stand up to oppose it. This is King Leopold, who personally owned the Congo and all of the people who lived there. This isn't even 19th century colonialism. This is Belgian King Leopold owning of the people and country of another place. And it is offensive to everything the UN pretends to be about. And so this is what we need. But because so many countries are on their knees before the US empire at this moment in absolute terror, we haven't seen that kind of action. And if it's going to happen, it's going to come from pressure from people, from social movements and unions and activists and media personalities and others to demand of their countries that they shut this thing down before it can do any real damage.
Yeah, I think it's just silly in terms of the theory of it, and that anybody would actually believe that there was any there other than it's him collecting money for private club membership like you would do in elementary school. And I think that its chance of success is about up there with their whole Gaza Riviera of that ever happening, because
it's a part of the same whole.
Right. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. And I'm not exactly sure what will happen, but that's not going to happen.
Well, I mean, in the meantime, we see what will happen because all of this is connected, right? To Donald Trump and Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, Gaza is a piece of real estate, just as Iran is a piece of real estate. Southern Lebanon is a piece of real estate. And they and the Israelis are joined in their vision of the total ethnic cleansing of Gaza. They may be sometimes more diplomatic about it, but the idea is to, look at the systematic nature of the Israeli genocide in Gaza, the way it moved from north to south, and not only chased people away and murdered them, but destroyed everything in its wake, 95% of Gaza, and sometimes having destroyed it, bulldozing it flat, so that if people wanted to come back, they couldn't find even where their house used to be, or the shards of bone of their loved ones who were killed on that spot. This is an effort to completely erase that, stage number one. Stage two is to take over that territory through the Board of Peace so that Israel gets ultimate control, but Trump and Kushner and Tony Blair and others make a profit, a monetary profit from the genocide in the process. So, I think you're right, that bizarre AI image of shining towers that Jared Kushner, without blushing, projected to the so-called Board of Peace.
Well, he is an android, to be fair. He doesn't have human emotions.
So. No, it's what he has. It's what he has. He is. He's an android. He is soulless. But what he has in common with the rest of his comrades in arms there is that they have no sort of moral parameters whatsoever. There's no notion of right and wrong, of, as I said, international law, international institutions, international diplomacy. In fact, a big part of the push on behalf of the Israeli regime, of the Trump administration, has been not only to bulldoze over UN institutions and international law, but to dismantle them. That's why the sanctions on Francesca, the sanctions on the ICC, the withdrawal of the US contributions to the budgets of a dozen UN agencies, its decision not to pay the dues that it owns in the billions of dollars to the United Nations, its active slandering of the UN, its efforts to shut down UNRWA with lies and smears. It's not just the Palestinian and Lebanese people or progressive voices in the US that are in the gun sites. International law, international institutions are in the gun sites because they're annoying for the expansionist imperial projects of these monsters of the 21st century.
I think
I just want to ask you before I forget, Sunny wants to know if you would she works with Doctors Against Genocide. I don't know if you're familiar with that organization, but if you would maybe consider doing a Sunday webinar for them about that resolution, and if I could maybe connect you, is that okay?
No, with pleasure. Be happy to do something. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay.
There are many theories as to how the empire will collapse. I believe we're in the process of it happening right now. I also believe that so much of all of what we have seen, particularly the Zionist movement, is a class-based movement. There really is something to be said for the rich and powerful being just a little too brazen in their godlike complexes that they have found themselves in the age of advanced technology. I believe it will ultimately be their downfall. I believe that, like pretty much any empire throughout history, the devaluation of the global currency is inevitably happening. I don't know what your thoughts are on BRICS and BRICS attempts at a currency backed by gold, but as far as I can tell, if that does come to fruition, which it looks like it is, the US dollar is already in free fall. The idea of having a $1.5 trillion military budget only accelerates it that much further. I do believe that, like the British Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Roman Empire, we've seen it throughout history, Nazi Germany, the Soviet Union, we could go on, but it's all relatively similar in terms of overexpansion, in terms of devaluing the currency, the loss of faith by the populace. So much of this has just repeated itself over and over again. And as we look for solutions and conclusion to, I mean, obviously Israel is going to collapse a lot faster than we will, but you have to think about what the future looks like here in terms of what is going to happen regarding the UN once the US is no longer the world's hegemon and is not able to dictate terms universally. How do you see things unfolding, not just in lieu of the war that we're in right now, but how ultimately, if the empire, assuming you would agree, that the empire is going to collapse and what that's going to look like as we wind down the conversation?
Well, I definitely agree that the US empire is coming unraveled, and that one of the major factors in that unraveling has been imperial hubris by the US empire, the arrogance of its actions all around the globe, and the fact that sort of Donald Trump has pulled back the mask, right, that allowed him to function with the agreement of liberal institutions and so on, the empire to function. He sort of pulled off the mask, and he just says, the quiet part out loud. I might take Cuba, I might free it, or I might just take it, he said in his interviews.
It's a level of caucasity that has no bounds.
Yeah.
No bounds. It's the diarrhea that comes out of his mouth. But ironically, it's what they all think. He's just the one saying it. But yeah,
he's taking the mask off. Yeah, he's taking the mask off, but it's the same ugly face. Remember, Joe Biden presided over almost 2 years of genocide, enthusiastically participating in that genocide. So it's not like if Donald Trump goes away, either is replaced by one of the monsters in the Republican Party or one of the monsters in the Democratic Party, that suddenly you're going to see a rosier case. But yes.
I do want to interject on one point, though, which I think is very important here, and this is one of the reasons why I actually think that Trump being in power is the silver lining in a positive way compared to somebody like Hillary Clinton, Obama, Biden, Kamala Harris, etc. neoliberalism is so much more dangerous than neoconservatism, because you can have a diplomatic individual like a Tony Blinken, who really was the president for the past 4 years, being the exact same person that perhaps the most revolting neoconservative of all, John Bolton, is, and they're basically the same person. They have the same neoliberal slash neoconservative foreign policy philosophy of world domination, but Blinken is much more accepted in diplomatic circles, much as Kamala would have just been a figurehead in a way that Trump is simply not capable of being. And when that mask comes off, it awakens a sleeping giant amongst the populace that are already fed up with how they cannot afford to live as it is. But now that you're kind of seeing, that's why I have always admired Bernie Sanders' run for president in 2016, when Bernie was the Bernie Sanders that he always wanted to be. And he started talking about things like the Koch brothers. People didn't really understand what the billionaire Zionist oligarchic class really was. They couldn't put a face to it, but then they started to. And now you can really put a face to all of this, and you can't look away. There is no going back to sleep now. That's over. Like we are entering a new revolutionary change here in this country. How that unfolds, I'm not sure. But if there is a silver lining to Trump, it's the fact that so many people who would have just went back to sleep, they're not going back to sleep ever again.